The answer is more than $67,000 of long-term liability per person. Add on to this debt the debt accumulated by your city, your state, your county, and your school board. Clearly, every city, state, county, and school district have different levels of efficiency and liabilities. In Austin, Texas, my hometown, we have a local government per-person debt that looks like this. City, $5,857. State, $655. County, $485. School district, $985. Total, $7,982. Check the numbers in your own city, county, school district, and state. These numbers also do not include the junior college or the various smaller taxing authorities in our area. Now, add on to this number personal debt, home mortgages, car, truck mortgages, student loans, credit card debt, etc. Clearly, every individual and every family have different resources, incomes, and debt structures. When you add up all consumer debt, not including corporate debt, we are looking at another $10,000 per person. The grand total is over $84,000 of debt per person. This debt figure is averaged out by including every single person in our country, and yet less than 45% of the population are actually in the workforce, and a high percentage of these people are working at subsistence-level jobs. The amount of debt for the middle-class working person is truly overwhelming. It must also be remembered that this number does not include interest. It does not take a doctorate in economics to figure out how serious this problem really is. By most traditional standards, we are bankrupt.
One who is reduced to financial ruin, depleted, according to Webster's 7th Collegiate Dictionary.
However, as we can all see, the economic machine at this time is still running strong. New houses are being built. There are lots of new cars. The stock market is in the stratosphere, and the restaurants are full of people spending money. So what gives, and how is this happening? The Wizard of Oz could not have created a more realistic illusion than what the international plutocrats have fabricated for us. By creating and using the Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banking, derivatives, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the IRS, and international treaties, these whirling dervishes of international finance have turned and twisted our economy inside out. The whole economic system is really not much more than an elaborate Ponzi scheme. The end result is those who use their labor, those who have saved, and those who provide productive skills are eventually defrauded of their assets. The elite's favorite mantra is to recite the golden rule.
Whoever has the gold makes the rules.
It is absolutely fundamental for all patriots to have a working knowledge of how our economy is being manipulated, because this is the main weapon that the oligarchy use to create fear and exploit the people of this world.
The Federal Reserve Board and fractional reserve banking.
The silver bullet in the arsenal of the elite is the ownership and control of the Federal Reserve Board, the Fed. This agency, which controls more power than any other entity in our country, is not part of our government and needs to be examined very closely. Our founding fathers were adamant that our national banking system be decentralized and owned by the people, and that we were to have a hard currency, one that was backed by gold or silver. They wanted to make sure that our money had a real worth and that it would not become a commodity in itself. They knew the banking systems of Europe were controlled by the monarchies, and that economic freedom and opportunities for anyone other than the privileged few were remote. That is why the Founding Fathers defined the banking system in the very first article of the Constitution, Section 8. One of the biggest stories that is never reported in our nation's history has been the ongoing battle between the populists who believe in constitutional money and the plutocrats who want to own the banks and be allowed to issue fiat currency that has no intrinsic value. It doesn't take much to figure who gets rich in this scheme. Group A can print money for the cost of the paper and ink and can lend it to Group B. Group B is made to believe that they have to borrow the money to do business and survive. To borrow, Group B must first put up their hard-earned collateral, which consists of their homes, farms, cars, and businesses, and then pay off these loans with compounded interest. Now, guess which group gets all the assets and power? It certainly isn't Group B, which represents 99.9% of the population. If you guessed Group A, which represents the leadership of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, you were right. In a nutshell, this is how the Fed works. The name, the Federal Reserve Board, is a complete oxymoron. The Fed, in truth, is a privately owned corporation, and there are no reserves. It was given this name in 1913 to deceive the American public. If you look up Federal Reserve Board in the phone book, it is not in the government section. Instead, it is next to Federal Express in the business pages. According to former Congressman Wright Patman,
in its history, the Federal Reserve System has never been subjected to a complete independent audit, and it is the only important agency that refuses to consent to an audit by the Congress's agency, the General Accounting Office.
Furthermore, the Fed uses the insidious scheme known as fractional reserve banking. Here is how this system works. Suppose the Fed Central Bank orders up $1 million to be printed from the United States Treasury. The Fed pays the Treasury for the cost of ink, paper, and printing, which is an infinitesimal percentage of the face value of the notes. Then, the Fed Central Bank lends these notes to Federal Reserve regional banks at a very low rate of interest called the discount rate. The Federal Reserve regional banks then lends this so-called money out to the businesses and citizens of this country at a multiple of at least 7 to 1 at the higher prime rate. Thus, they are able to lend out $7 million in credit when they have little or no reserves behind these loans. This is why it is called fractional reserve banking. If the prime rate is 8%, they are generating $560,000 of gross interest, or more appropriately said, gross profit, per year. If the customer is not able to pay back the principal and interest, the bank is able to foreclose and take the collateral. This astronomical profit the owners of the Fed have created for themselves is at the expense of the American people. This is only accomplished by deceit on the part of the Fed and the elite, and by the lack of consciousness of our citizenry. If you look at it, the whole system of fractional reserve banking is based upon borrowing more and more credit just to pay off the initial principal and the compounding interest. This is the very definition of a Ponzi scheme, and the only ones that prosper are the owners of the Fed and the Federal regional banks. The modern-day puppet masters learned their trade from Mayer Rothschild and his descendants, who fine-tuned the fractional reserve formula. They knew that fractional reserve banking follows a mathematical formula that everyone who borrows and works within that system will eventually go bankrupt, whether it be 5 years, 50 years, or 500 years. If the people of America ever figured out that this so-called money was actually worthless, there would be a major uprising. For the good of the country and for 99.9% of all Americans, the closing down of the Fed and the return to constitutional money needs to be our first priority.
The strings of the puppeteers, leveraging and derivatives.
The people of America are constantly told that we have a free market system. This quite simply is not the truth. The truth is that a handful of plutocrats have control of our economy and pull the economic strings that make our nation dance to their marionettes' song. At first, this is hard to see and harder to accept.